Hi, I'm Selena and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing 3 reviews for the 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin, Hollowpox by Jessica Townsend, and also Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. So, as usual, when I go through these books, I am going to be giving some detail. They're all non-spoiler, but if you don't like detail in your reviews, you don't like to know anything about your books, skip this video until you've read them. And for now, we are going to get started with the 100,000 Kingdoms. So this was my first Jemisin book, and it was very interesting. I enjoyed it, so let's just first get that out of the way. I'm not someone who doesn't enjoy Jemisin. I did enjoy this book quite a bit, actually. I can see why her writing is sort of hit or miss for people. I think it was mostly a hit for me, and I'm really excited to keep going with her stuff, especially because people tend to think The 100,000 Kingdoms is not one of her best books, and specifically in the Inheritance trilogy, it's like a lot of people say it's not as good as the next two, or at least the next one at least, so I'm very excited to continue with Jemisin to see what her other stuff is like. So The 100,000 Kingdoms is basically about this woman named Yena, I think? Yena, that's what I read. It's about this woman named Yena who is kind of estranged from her very powerful family called the Aramaris, and this family rules over like an empire or like several kingdoms basically, and they are very ruthless, and it is time for another heir to the empire to be chosen. And how it's chosen is several of the heirs basically have to fight to the death, and the last one standing is gonna take over. And so Yena very like unexpectedly is called back to her family's castle, I guess, where her family's city, where she's never been, where her mother was at one point, and meets her family and is told she is one of the heirs and has to be the last one standing if she wants to win and be in control of the empire. And then there's also gods in this story, because basically the Aramari family has enslaved 4 gods and has them trapped in mortal form, running around the city and keeping them, like, doing their bidding, basically. And so you see a lot of Yena's interaction with the gods and other members of the family. So I do need to make clear about that summary. This is a very political book. It's very slow, one might say. It's not a sort of Hunger Games arena fight to death. There's none of that. It's more a slow political maneuvering and, like, private political assassinations. That's sort of the vibe of this book. That's how this fight to the death is supposed to go. The stakes come in because Yena has never grown up with this family. She doesn't appreciate their ways. She has her own ruthless streaks, but she is not someone who exercises them nearly as much as this family. And it's basically her navigating this space where she is looked at as either basically not even worth the dirt on someone's boot, like could just be completely overlooked. She didn't grow up here. She doesn't have what it takes. That's how people see her anyway. But also people seeing her as a legitimate threat. It's like the family can't really decide how to see her, and so she's navigating this space where she is both underestimated and still has a big target on her back. And because this isn't a very action-oriented book, I could see some people thinking it's slow, because it's much more about character interactions and characters finding out information and making relationships, whether it's good or bad, etc. But that being said that it could be slow to some people. It didn't really feel slow to me, because this is a 400-page book, and most fantasy books are not 400 pages. So I found this very refreshing to just be in a 400-page book that did what it was here to do and did it in a short amount of time, and I could get through it much quicker than a lot of fantasy books, and I was into it. I was really into how short and sweet this was. I mean, sweet. It's a very dark world. But I was really into how much Jemisin got done with this book and how it was supposed to be, it was being exactly what it was. And you might think it's slow, but because it's so short, the slowness, the lack of action doesn't really bother me, because I mean, this is, like, if I'm reading a Sanderson book, I expect there not to be 400 pages of action. Like, I expect long lulls like that. Whereas The 100,000 Kingdoms, I didn't feel like there was ever a lull where nothing was happening, but there wasn't a lot of action, and I was just fine with that. I was fine. It was short. It was interesting, no matter whether there was action or not. It didn't have a slow, boring feeling to me. But again, you have to know what this is to be okay with that. This is a lot of talking. This is a lot of making deals. This is a lot of alliance making. This is a lot of people are conspiring against your main character. You have a lot of our main character getting information, finding out things about her mother's past and her place within this empire and things like that. And it was good, but it was so different from most fantasy books that I think you have to know that's what you're getting with this one. You're not going to be getting like probably the same sort of political intrigue that you are used to. And if it helps you at all, I pretty much always enjoyed this book, and that's unusual for me. I don't tend to love books that feel like or are somewhat like slow or like less action, but this one didn't feel like it was slow. So I guess that's the balance that it struck perfectly with me. One thing that did trip me up a little bit is this is written in a very literary style. So I like literary fiction. I have a shelf where I have a few literary fictions that I love, but I don't tend to, it doesn't tend to be my favorites. And it takes a special author to do literary stuff very well. This is a very literary fantasy. It's written in a very experimental style, which I find is one of the best ways to tell if something is literary, if it's written in an experimental style. N.K. Jemisin is 10,000% known for writing something in an experimental style and having her books be kind of literary sci-fantasy or just fantasy. And that's very much where this one falls into. There is a literary device that she uses that doesn't make sense to me at first, but it didn't make sense to me at first, it's not supposed to. So I was fine going through it and just, being a little bit confused, but then when it made sense, it made sense. So yeah, I think she uses her literary devices very well. But because it is told in a literary sort of format, it did at times become tedious for me to read, but only when I was reading Piranesi as well. Basically, I was reading Piranesi and this at the same time, and y'all know if you've watched my Piranesi review, I will link it, that I didn't love that book. I gave it like 3 stars at this point. I've lowered it to like from 3.5 to 3. And I just think I had mixed feelings. There were some things I could appreciate about it, and some things, namely the way it was written without being much plot, was not a good combination for me to like that book. But The 100,000 Kingdoms suffers, it didn't suffer for me, from basically the same thing. It doesn't have a whole lot of like fast, like going plot. But it's also written in a pretty literary way. It's a very different experimental way. It doesn't feel like, I don't know, like a Sanderson or like a classic fantasy or whatever. And basically I think what happened was I went into this expecting it to be quite literary, enjoying it, and I picked up Piranesi hoping that it would be more my taste and it would be sort of a break from this literary style. And I think what I got was an even more literary, if you can call it that, book that just didn't work for me. So I found that when I was reading Piranesi, I really lost patience for that style, but reading both at the same time was a chore. But once I got in gear and like finished Piranesi, didn't enjoy it very much, and got back to this, I enjoyed it much, much more. So I ended up enjoying this a lot more than Piranesi. I think that the way this was done, it proves that I can like this type of fantasy book, and they're very different fantasy books, but they have similarities in how they're both written literarily and like plot-wise, like the pacing and stuff. And I feel like I just enjoyed the way this one was done more. And I think part of that is because I had the right expectations, and part of that is just it fit with my taste a bit more. I think N.K. Jemisin is so good at doing it, where with Piranesi I wanted something different from it. So as long as you go in knowing about that, I think you could prepare yourself to, be okay with that more literary experimental style, maybe not understanding why she's writing it a certain way right away. I was fine with all that. I didn't find that it made me enjoy this book any less. Everybody says this about Jemisin, but I have to talk about the writing. The writing is so good for this book. Her writing, just the way she would describe things that I personally wasn't even that interested in reading about, like scenes and things. I was just like, she has described things so interestingly and with such an interesting style that's so like unique, and like everyone says she has a very unique writing style. You can see in everything she writes, and I totally see it. I can feel that this is a Jemisin book, and I can feel that writing style, I could see it carrying in everything she does. I've read a Jemisin short story before, so when I said that this was my first Jemisin, I was kind of lying. It's my first full Jemisin like novel, but I did read a short story I can't remember the name of, but it was very good. But I definitely enjoyed this more. But I basically recognized her style from that short story, and I know that this is something that she will carry into other books, and I enjoyed it. I'm glad I enjoyed it. I think it's a great writing style. She's such a way with words that is just really great to read. One thing that was sort of lacking for me in this one was characters, feeling connected to characters. I liked these characters. I enjoyed reading about them. But what I really love in a character is I love to feel like a fly on the wall in the corners of their mind. I like to be like, basically, you know, in like the Kane Chronicles, and honestly, some books I've read recently, there's sometimes like there was like the Egyptian gods in the Kane Chronicles that like were in some of the magicians' heads. Like they would be, the magicians would host them. Like I want to feel like I am in a character's head, like watching everything they do and hearing all their thoughts. And some of my favorite books do this, like Stormlight and Sword of Kaigan. I love to hear those really like complex, sometimes dizzying thoughts that someone has that is just so like deep and like so deeply embedded in their mind. I love that stuff. And that's not really what this book is. It's a first person book. And in that, I do feel like I sometimes feel almost less connected to some first person books because I feel like the character is telling me what they want me to hear rather than me just eavesdropping it from the book. And so I feel less close to them. I tend to, at least. And then that put together with this is sort of a literary book where you're not getting all sorts of like character thoughts. You're not getting a close first person. You do hear Yena's thoughts quite a lot, but you also don't get her thoughts on like everything. There is a certain level of distance that is maintained, and that doesn't work as well for me. So I don't get what I love out of characters out of that writing style. I don't get to like ride along in their head for that. I can still enjoy books like that, and I do, and I did enjoy these characters a lot. I was surprised how much when I finished the book I was into these characters and happy for them and sad for them, and I was invested. These last like 100 pages, I was fully here for all the characters when I wasn't sure I was gonna be at the first 100 pages. But again, it didn't reach that like level of like love that I get to with characters that I get to ride along in their mind with. One other thing I would say, I will try to list trigger warnings for this book because it's not that a lot of triggering content happens in this book, it's that a lot of triggering content is mentioned because this is a very dark world and a lot of the gods are literally enslaved, and so the things that they are forced to do are very dark a lot of the time. You hear about them, you don't really see them. But the one content warning I will give is there is some, at least 2 sex scenes that are very detailed. And the way that Jemison writes them is a little bit, I would say experimental, but also it's not super detailed in the exact acts going on. So I don't know, but it is very like, it is pretty detailed in other ways. So I would just warn about that if it's not something that you're into. Maybe the series won't be for you. Like she has a purpose for it. It's not here for no reason. But if you're worried about that, just maybe avoid the books or just avoid those scenes or just be aware. Just be aware. Overall, I enjoyed this. I recommend it. If you can read it, please pick it up. I am excited to read more of Jemison after this. I was told not to start with this one. I did it anyway, and I really enjoyed it, so I'm excited. And because of how much I enjoyed this one, I actually gave it 4 stars. It was very, very good. I enjoyed it a lot. And now we switch to my favorite book of the reviews for this batch, and that is Hollowpox by Jessica Townsend. This is the 3rd book in the Nevermore series. This is the 2nd one, Wondersmith, right there. Y'all know I've been loving the series. Y'all know that I am so into it right now, and it is one of my favorite series at this point. I read Nevermore. I have a review for it, so I will link it. I loved it when I read it. I thought it was so, so good. And then I followed up with Wondersmith. I also reviewed for that. I will link that as well. I loved Wondersmith even more. That's still, I think, my favorite in the series. But Hollowpox was so good as well. It was so nice to be back in this world. It always just is. As this is the 3rd book in the series, it is kind of hard to talk about spoiler-free. I will be trying to, though. The biggest thing I can say about this book is things progress. Lots of different things. Lots of different things that have been set up for several books or we've been expecting or even dreading for several books come to pass. And I think that that is it's the timing is good. This series has always worked with timing, in my opinion, of having things happen when they feel like they need to happen, when the author's been sort of teasing it long enough. I think that the pacing with that is right on point, and that continues with this book. We progress a lot, and I enjoyed seeing that. The other thing that progresses is theme. Don't get too excited if you're a theme person, like Dune is like your favorite book or whatever, because this is a middle grade series. But for a middle grade series, I think it was really interesting in theme, and the plot was like, and the themes were like scary relevant to our world right now. And this was published in 2020, I believe, but it was written like before obviously all of the panorama things happened in 2020. So it was odd to me. I was like, I know this must have been written before this stuff happened, but it feels very relevant. And this is a good time to probably tell you a little bit about the plot. Basically, this time in this book, we have a disease that is affecting this magical race of the world called Wunimals, which basically look like animals, but they walk on two legs, they talk like humans, they have full human emotions. They're basically human minds in the body of animals. And they're called Wunimals because they have a gathering of wonder, which is basically the magical essence around them that allows them to be this way. And basically this disease only affects them. So only Wunimals can get infected by this disease, but it affects everyone in the world. And basically the Wonder Society, which is, one of the main focuses of this book, is trying to figure out what is going on and how to contain this disease. And because the disease only infects Wunimals, but it affects everyone adversely, it brings about a lot of hidden prejudice, or not even hidden, but like latent prejudice that people had about Wunimals to start with. It basically proves their point in their like confirmation biasing minds. And so you see an uptick in prejudice and discrimination and just hate towards Wunimals in general. You see the rise of populist groups that capitalize off of hating Wunimals and people's fears. And I just think it was done pretty well. For a middle grade, it was done pretty well, exploring themes of how when you are scared and when you are desperate, even when you're not necessarily the one who is affected the worst by something, even when there's other people who have it worse, but when your fear is talked to, it can also bring out the worst in people. It can bring out the worst instincts of getting rid of that fear. And I just thought it was done really well for middle grade. That is a very plot character-y book. It is not really interested in tons of themes. I thought it handled it pretty well. Another thing was interesting about this book that was kind of a small part, but we got to see a little bit more of the world, or not even see more of the world, because we're pretty much always in this smaller setting of Nevermore. I really enjoyed seeing how we got to see a little bit more politics between Nevermore and the Wintersea Republic. We start Nevermore, the first book in the series, in the Wintersea Republic, and their whole deal with Nevermore, their relationship, was very not clear to me until this book. And I think that it was nice to see Jessica Townsend go into that and explain a little bit why things happened the way they did, what is going on with their relationship, things like that. That was just something I liked because I like world stuff. It's not that big of a deal, but just wanted to say it. My favorite thing about this book, though, was hands down Morgan Crow and her relationships with people, her development. First of all, she's aging. This is a series where I think it's about a year between each book. So Morgan is 13 right now. She feels like a 13-year-old. To me, Morgan is a very someone might say she's like a bland-ish character, but she just has a very subdued personality. But I think that she has a personality, and I can see it changing as she ages, just like a normal person's would. You keep your core, but you age differently. And so I really enjoyed that. She feels like a teenager. I just love her so much. I have loved watching this kid grow up in this series. Probably more than is reasonable, just because I don't think the character work is the best ever. I'm not going to compare it to Misaki and sort of Kaiken, but it just really works for me, and I really enjoy Morgan as a character. She's just a little moody, and a little sassy, but like internally, I just love Morgan so much. But I also really enjoyed how this book, I think it went a little bit further into Morgan's trauma. I can see Morgan's trauma sort of catching up to her. It's always been sort of dogging her in the first two books, but I feel like someone who has gone through trauma, even when you were out of the situation for 1-2 years, you can still feel like you're running from it. And that, I think, is unintentionally, maybe intentionally, what Morgan is doing in the first two books. And in this book, she's finally sort of paused to take a breath, and sort of the emotions of what has happened for her, what has changed for her and what she has gone through haven't left her. They're settling in, and she, has been running so long that she's forgotten a little bit of what happened, and it's sort of coming back to haunt her. And I just think it's really well done in this book. It was really great to see like that exploration, and it was so great to see a child with this trauma be supported through the whole of the 3 books. What I love about this book is Morgan's emotions are valued. Morgan's traumas are validated. And there are adults in her life who actively know this and want to make the world easier for her. And I just love that. I think it needs to be in more middle grade, because there are kids who have this trauma and maybe don't have those adults, maybe do. And there are adults who do not know how to deal with that in 11, 12, 13-year-olds. And I think that if there's one thing this book does amazingly, it is those amazing sort of guardian parental relationships with a child who has been through a lot. So good. And speaking of relationships, I think the relationships that Morgan has with Jupiter, Fen, her friends, her like pseudo brother, Jack, like I think they are so good. In this one, they're complex. They can be a little messy because Morgan, she's going through a bit. She, sometimes doesn't treat everyone the absolute best, but she's by no means like a terrible person or anything. But she fights with people. Relationships aren't perfect, and I love that this book has that without them being crazy toxic or without like friendships being like ruined or whatever. But also, even through those messy moments, the bond that Morgan has with people sticks. She doesn't have to fear of losing those people because they have such a deep bond, and it's stronger than that. The biggest weakness of this book, in my opinion, was probably the ending. I thought it was a bit convenient, a bit disappointing, especially compared to Wondersmith's ending. I think Nevermore didn't have a disappointing ending, but it wasn't like a traditional climactic ending. Wondersmith was a big ending, and Hollowpox had what felt like a building to a crazy big ending, and then it resolved somewhat cleanly. But there was one thing that happened at the end that had been foreshadowed for a long time, and I didn't know how I was going to feel about it, but I think I like the direction where it's going. I think I really enjoy this. I'm super excited to continue reading this series when the next book finally comes out. Not finally, it's only been like not that long. But yeah, I loved this book despite that ending thing. I loved so many things this book did. I do think it's my least favorite in the series just because Wondersmith is my favorite, and Nevermore, I do think as the first one, did a lot of things that I have to give it more credit for. But yeah, Hollowpox was amazing, and I so enjoyed it. Yeah, I gave it 5 stars. Are we surprised? You shouldn't be. And finally, my final review that I'm going to do today is Artificial Condition. I promise this one's going to be short. This is the second book in the Murderbot series. I have reviewed All Systems Red, the first one, so I will link that. And let's just get into my very brief thoughts on Artificial Condition. If you don't know anything about this series, go check out All Systems Red. I explain it better here, but basically what I'm going to say about it is we have a Murderbot AI type thing who has hacked its governor module and basically rules itself, and it's very humanoid. It's developed very humanoid emotions, including anxiety and depression, and it is very relatable, very it just very much just wants to sit and watch its entertainment, but yeah, it keeps getting pulled into missions. And that's really all I want to say about the plot. I think I should have liked this plot better because I thought the All Systems Red character was good, but the plot was okay. And I think the Artificial Condition plot was probably should have been more interesting to me, but I just didn't find it that interesting. The thing that I loved about this book, even more than in book one, was the characters. So Murderbot, I think his voice is, or its voice is getting to be so much more prominent and just endearingly itself. Like I've just mentioned how with first person, I sometimes feel like a first person narrative is telling me what I want, what they want me to hear almost, and not keeping in everything or whatever. I don't feel that way with Murderbot, because Murderbot is just so honest and endearing. I don't feel like, I do feel pretty connected to Murderbot. And then I really loved the new character that is introduced, Art, and Art's relationship with Murderbot was so good. It is the reason why I gave this book a 3.5 stars rather than just a 3, because that relationship was just stellar. The rest of the characters were meh, but Murderbot and Art were great. Plot, though, is where I get caught up. I was zoning in and out of this plot. It just wasn't very interesting to me, and I wasn't gripped by it. I think that I liked the character work better in this one, which is why I feel weird giving it a lower rating than All Systems Red. But I do think that All Systems Red plot at least interested me. So I think Artificial Conditions character work is 10 times better, and that was what I really enjoyed more than anything in All Systems Red. But the plot was just so meh to me that I couldn't deal with it. Basically, what my thoughts on Artificial Condition come down to is I hope that we go somewhere else in the next one, Rogue Patrol, and I hope that we don't need any of the plot of this one to to really explain what's going on for me to keep up with Rogue Patrol, because I didn't enjoy this one and I barely know what happened. So that's my review on Artificial Condition. And that concludes these reviews, I guess. So thank you for watching this review set, and I will see you next time. Bye!